Archangel Michael says, the moment your eyes locked with theirs, the atmosphere froze like shattered glass suspended in midair. Every secret they tried to bury suddenly rose to the surface, trembling inside their chest as if you had read their entire soul. What they saw in your eyes wasn't weakness. It was a mirror of truth that burned through every false word they had ever spoken. The silence after that moment was deafening, and yet the world felt louder than ever. Your stare carried weight they weren't prepared to carry, and it made their knees buckle under pressure. That look exposed the game they thought they were winning, revealing that you had known their intentions all along. Every hidden betrayal, every whisper in the dark, every plan to break you, your eyes reflected it back to them like fire. And for the first time, they realized they weren't the hunter. They were the prey trembling under the gaze of destiny. Taipei men to get blessing 333. They tried to smile, but the mask cracked instantly when faced with that unshakable glow in your eyes. Their hands fumbled, their voice stumbled, their lies shattered like fragile glass on a stone floor. You didn't speak, yet the silence screamed louder than thunder, leaving them stripped of every excuse they had prepared. Inside they begged for mercy, but they knew the truth was already carved across their face. They never expected you to stand this strong, this unbreakable, this radiant with power they couldn't define. Your eyes carried the weight of storms and the warmth of eternal light. A contradiction they couldn't endure. They wanted to look away, but they couldn't. They were trapped, paralyzed, as though heaven itself had commanded them to witness their own downfall. Taipei men to get blessing 444. The whispers of their betrayal still echoed in the background. Yet none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the fear that took root in their chest when they realized they could no longer hide. It wasn't just a stare. It was judgment. It was prophecy. It was the sign that their time was running out. They thought they could manipulate you, deceive you, break you. But in that moment, their own reflection inside your eyes revealed who truly held the power. They realized the game was over and the scoreboard had always been tilted in your favor. Tears stung their eyes, not out of sorrow for you, but fear of what they had awakened by underestimating you. And the more they looked, the more their heart raced, unable to escape the truth staring back at them. Taipei men to get blessing 555. If you wish to express your support further, you have the option to give super thanks with contributions of up to $20. Archangel Michael says, they didn't just see your eyes. They saw the heavens standing behind you. They felt the weight of angels protecting you, of unseen hands lifting you higher than they ever dreamed. Every curse they muttered against you turned into their own downfall, bouncing back like arrows they couldn't dodge. They were terrified because your eyes spoke a language their soul understood. You cannot touch the chosen. And in that moment, their schemes, their manipulations, their carefully crafted illusions fell apart. No amount of power or wealth could shield them from what was reflected in you. They backed away, but it was too late. The imprint of your gaze had already marked them like fire seared into their spirit. Taipei men to get blessing 666. They thought the darkness they carried could overpower the light within you. But the instant your eyes pierced through them, that illusion collapsed like ashes scattered in the wind. They stood trembling, realizing that what they saw wasn't ordinary. It was divine fire cloaked in silence. Every scar, every wound, every sleepless night you endured had turned into strength reflected in your gaze. It wasn't just a look. It was a prophecy written in your eyes, a warning they could no longer ignore. The room itself felt smaller, suffocating, as though every wall was closing in on their deceit. They wanted to escape, but your presence made the ground beneath them feel like chains. And in that moment, they knew running would not save them. Your eyes had already revealed their fate. Tape amen to get blessing. 777. The truth cut deeper than any blade, for it came without words, without force, just your silent fire. They thought they were safe in shadows. But your gaze pulled their secrets into the light effortlessly. They had no shield, no excuse, no way to rewrite what had already been exposed. The very lies they built now strangled them because your eyes carried the weight of truth. Their heart raced with fear, as if every beat echoed the sound of their guilt. What shocked them wasn't just what you saw. It was the undeniable proof that you already knew. They collapsed inside even as they forced themselves to stand. Your silence had already judged them more than any sentence ever could. Type amen to get blessing. 888. Archangel Michael says, the power in your gaze was not of this world. It was heaven's stamp upon you. They tried to laugh it off, but their trembling betrayed them. Their mask fell apart piece by piece. It was as though the very air carried your authority, and their lies suffocated under it. They thought they could bend destiny, but they never expected destiny to stare back at them through your eyes. And in that moment, they lost every ounce of power they pretended to hold. Your presence became the storm they couldn't silence, the mirror they couldn't break. The weight of their conscience dragged them down, and they felt the chains of their own betrayal tighten. All because your gaze had turned their hidden darkness into their loudest confession. Type amen to get blessing. 999. Their soul shook as if the ground beneath them cracked wide open. Every secret meeting, every false smile, every whispered betrayal came back to haunt them. Your eyes pulled those memories out of hiding and forced them to face what they had done. For them, it wasn't just fear. It was humiliation. It was exposure. It was Judgment Day. They knew the game was finished. The walls were crumbling and nothing could rebuild the lies. What they saw in you wasn't just light. It was justice. The longer they stared, the weaker they became. And the weaker they became, the stronger your silence grew. Tape amen to get blessing. 1111. The walls trembled with the weight of unspoken truth, and every heartbeat echoed louder than thunder. They never thought one single glance could strip away years of deception so mercilessly. Yet your eyes carved open a reality they had prayed would remain hidden forever. Their chest tightened, their throat dried, and their body betrayed their own secrets. You stood unmoved, your silence louder than any scream they had ever feared. That look had the power of storms, and it told them clearly there was no turning back. They shifted, restless, unable to breathe under the fire that lingered in your gaze. And the more they tried to resist, the deeper your eyes consumed the mask they wore. Type Amen to get blessing. 1212 Every shadow that followed you was trembling now because your light had cornered them. It wasn't rage that burned in your eyes. It was justice. It was revelation. It was destiny speaking. They knew instantly that every plan, every word, every knife they sharpened against you was shattered. Your strength was not loud. It was quiet, unshakable, and terrifying to those who once mocked you. The kind of strength no enemy could control or silence. The kind of strength that burned through their lies like fire through dry wood. They were no longer in control. What they saw in your eyes reminded them that heaven had already chosen sides. Type Amen to get blessing. 1313 Archangel Michael says, they will never forget the fire that pierced their soul that day. The angels stood with you, cloaked inside your gaze, revealing their betrayal for what it truly was. They were stunned because your presence became their greatest punishment. Their laughter turned to silence. Their pride turned to trembling. And their confidence turned to ashes. What they thought was a game had become their downfall. What they thought was hidden had become their exposure. You didn't need words. You only needed your truth shining through your eyes to break them. And they knew they had awakened something they could never defeat. Type Amen to get blessing. 1414 The shock never left them, for your eyes had branded their spirit with undeniable truth. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw yours burning, powerful, eternal. It was the kind of stare that haunted their nights and silenced their mornings. No weapon they formed could match the authority you carried inside that look. No lie could bend your reality once it was revealed in your vision. They were broken not by your hand but by your unshakable light, and the world around you began to shift, for heaven had marked you unstoppable. Your eyes became the prophecy they never saw coming and the curse they couldn't escape. Type Amen to get blessing. 1515 They thought they had you cornered, but your eyes told a different story. They weren't prepared for the depth, the power, the storm that lived behind your silence. Every glance was a strike of lightning, exposing them in ways they couldn't endure. Their lies melted, their pride crumbled, their strength vanished. The moment your gaze touched them, they were naked in spirit, trembling under the truth you carried effortlessly. And the fear they tried to hide only screamed louder the longer they stood before you. You didn't need to fight because your eyes did the work of 1,000 battles. They carried the voice of heaven and the weight of destiny all at once. Type Amen to get blessing. 1616 The shock they felt grew into something darker. Shame, guilt, and the heavy chains of regret. What they saw reminded them that they could never undo what they had done. Your eyes had become the mirror reflecting their betrayal back at them endlessly. Every word they spoke before now tasted bitter on their tongue. Every move they made now felt meaningless under the light of your presence. They weren't just shaken. They were dismantled piece by piece. And though they wanted to scream, their voice abandoned them. All that remained was silence and your gaze consuming their soul. Tape amen to get blessing. 1717, Archangel Michael says, your eyes were not just windows. They were weapons forged in divine fire. You carried in them a storm that no one could stand against. And what they saw in that moment was not just you. It was heaven roaring through you. They stepped back, but there was nowhere left to hide. The walls had already closed in on them, sealing their fate. Your truth had chased them into the very corner of their own darkness. Their body trembled, their heart raced, their soul quaked under the weight of your light. They knew in that instant they had lost everything they thought they controlled. Tape men to get blessing. 1818, the silence after your gaze was louder than thunder. Every secret they buried rose to the surface like ghosts that refused to stay quiet. They were surrounded by the echoes of their own lies, now turned against them. You didn't lift a hand, yet they felt defeated. You didn't utter a word, yet they heard judgment ringing in their bones. What they saw in your eyes destroyed the illusion they once lived in. And they knew they would never recover from that moment. For your eyes carried the power to both reveal and to condemn. Tape men to get blessing. 1919, they staggered as though the ground itself betrayed them. Shaking beneath the weight of their guilt. What they saw in your eyes wasn't anger. It was a silent power that demanded their soul's confession. And in that instant, every shadow they clung to dissolve in the light you carried. Your eyes didn't just look. They pierced. They unveiled. They consumed. They were drawn to it like moths to flame. But unlike flame, there was no escape. The truth burned them alive while leaving your spirit untouched, stronger, unshaken. They realized then that the fire inside you had been tested in silence, built in pain, forged in storms. And now that fire stood before them, staring unstoppable. Tape men to get blessing 2020. They had once laughed at you, dismissing your strength as fragile. But now their laughter haunted them because your gaze proved how wrong they had been. It was no longer a joke. It was a reckoning. The chill in the air clung to their skin, reminding them of what they couldn't run from. They saw in your eyes the power of survival, the kind they could never steal. Every plan they plotted against you crumbled in that very second. The walls whispered their downfall, and the silence screamed louder than words ever could. They weren't just afraid of you. They were afraid of what your presence represented. Type amen to get blessing. 2121, Archangel Michael says, your eyes have become the battlefield where truth always wins. They weren't prepared to see heaven standing tall behind you. But that's what terrified them most. It wasn't just you they faced. It was the legions of light guarding your soul. They trembled as if chains wrapped around their body, dragging their pride into the dust. Their strength dissolved, leaving them hollow shells before your presence. For the first time, they realized they were powerless. And in that helplessness, they understood. They had already lost. What they saw in your eyes was the very future they tried to erase, now unfolding against them. Tip a men to get blessing. 22:22, their voices faltered. Every excuse drowned in the intensity of that moment. Even the air felt heavy, pressing against their chest as though time itself had frozen. They were trapped in the reflection of your gaze, unable to escape the judgment it carried. Every lie tasted like poison now. Every betrayal echoed like thunder in their ears. And no matter how they tried to resist, their downfall was already written across their soul. Your eyes left a scar on them they could never erase. A scar that would haunt them in every dream, every waking thought, every silent night. Tip a men to get blessing. 23:23, they thought they could walk away and pretend nothing had happened. But your eyes followed them, echoing in their soul like thunder that refuses to fade. Every step they took away from you felt heavier, as if the ground itself carried your silent judgment. They could no longer hide, for your gaze had already exposed every corner of their deceit. Even in the darkness of their room, they saw the fire of your stare burning in their memory. It became the mirror they couldn't break, the reflection they couldn't deny. They tossed and turned at night, yet peace never came. For what they saw in your eyes had carved itself into their destiny forever. Tape a men to get blessing. 2400 hours 24, the world around them shifted, crumbling like glass against stone. They realized too late that they had awakened something sacred and unstoppable within you. Your silence spoke louder than armies, and your gaze struck deeper than swords. They replayed that moment endlessly, hoping to rewrite it in their mind. But no matter how they tried, the memory always returned the same. Your eyes, steady, unshaken, unbreakable, reminded them they could never undo what was done. The fear grew until it consumed their very breath. They were left standing in the ruins of their own betrayal. Tape men to get blessing. 25:25, Archangel Michael says that moment will forever haunt their spirit, for heaven's truth cannot be erased. They didn't just see your eyes. They saw angels standing behind you cloaked in fire. Every whisper against you became chains around their own soul. They wanted to scream, but the words never came. They wanted to run, but the ground kept pulling them back. Your presence was not just strength. It was a divine warning they could never escape. They realized then that your destiny was untouchable, and their plans had only written their own destruction. Type a men to get blessing. 26:26, everywhere they went, reminders of you followed. A sound, a shadow. Even the wind carried your presence back into their mind. They tried to bury the memory, but it only grew louder, stronger, darker. They couldn't meet the eyes of others without remembering yours. They couldn't lie without trembling at the thought of your silence. You had become the truth. They could never silence again. Their heart carried the weight of your stare like chains of fire. And those chains will never break no matter how far they run. Type a men to get blessing. 27:27, they thought time would dull the memory, but instead it sharpened like a blade. The longer they tried to forget, the clearer your eyes became in their mind. It was as if every second of silence replayed that stare again and again. Their spirit grew restless, unable to escape the prison of truth you left them in. Even in laughter, they felt your eyes haunting the corners of their joy. Even in company, they felt your silence louder than the noise around them. They couldn't escape because your eyes had marked them. It was no longer just memory. It was prophecy carved into their soul. Type of men to get blessing. 28:28, they lost sleep. They lost peace. They lost control of their own breath. Every plan they once made now felt pointless, stripped of meaning. Their confidence shattered, their voice trembled, and their heart knew no rest. What they saw in your eyes wasn't human. It was eternal. The light inside you had revealed itself, and it terrified them beyond reason. It was the kind of power no man, no shadow, no demon could resist. They bowed inside though they never admitted it aloud. Your eyes had become the throne they feared to kneel before. Type of men to get blessing. 29:29, Archangel Michael says their downfall began the moment they looked at you and saw what heaven had hidden inside. Your eyes were not just sight. They were judgment. They were fire. They were destiny. And nothing could erase that truth, not even their deepest lies. The chains of guilt grew heavier, wrapping around their spirit until it broke. They felt exposed, naked before a power they couldn't comprehend. The very air reminded them of the authority you carried. They knew then they had been defeated without a single word spoken. Your silence became their greatest punishment. Tape men to get blessing. 30:30, the shock never faded. Instead, it grew into an eternal fear. Every time they closed their eyes, yours appeared, piercing, relentless. It was as though heaven had carved that memory into their mind forever. They couldn't drink it away, couldn't laugh it away, couldn't run it away. Your gaze had burned itself into their destiny. A scar that would never heal. And no matter where they turned, that truth followed them like a shadow. The world itself seemed to remind them of what they had seen. And deep down they knew it was only the beginning. Tape meant to get blessing. 31:31, their body trembled under the weight of what they had seen. No weapon could wound them deeper than the reflection of their guilt in your gaze. It was the unspoken truth that stripped them bare, leaving nothing to hide behind. Their breath grew shallow, their pulse raced, and yet they could not move. Your eyes had locked them into a prison made of light, and there was no escape. Every fiber of their being screamed to run, but destiny had already chained them to that moment. The shock became unbearable, but it was also unforgettable. It etched itself into their memory like fire branding flesh. Type A men to get blessing. 32:32. They tried to laugh it off later, but the sound of their own voice betrayed them. Even their laughter carried fear, cracked and broken. They knew the truth. What they had seen in you could never be unseen. Every conversation they had afterward was haunted by the silence of your stare. They stumbled over words, their lies dissolving before they even left their tongue. They could no longer live in falsehood because your eyes had already burned it all away. Their pride collapsed into dust. And the dust followed them everywhere they went, reminding them of the moment they were undone. Tape a men to get blessing. 33:33, Archangel Michael says, your eyes are the sword of truth sharper than any blade. What they saw was not human fire, but divine light, unstoppable and undeniable. It struck their soul with the weight of eternity. They tried to forget, but heaven made sure they remembered. Their dreams became prisons filled with the memory of your gaze. Even in waking hours, they carried the scars of what they had witnessed. They couldn't face you again, but they couldn't escape you either, for your eyes had already marked their destiny forever. Tape men to get blessing. 34:34, the fear grew heavier each day, pressing against their chest. Every time they thought of you, their spirit trembled. They realized that no matter what they did, they could never outrun the truth. Your eyes had sealed their fate with a single look. It was the judgment they feared most and the revelation they could never reverse. What they saw wasn't just light. It was power. It was justice. It was heaven itself. And that memory would follow them for the rest of their life. Forever chained by the truth they could never erase. Type Amen to get blessing. 4444